So, by the year 1980, Ferrari's F1 effort was, for a lack of a more polite term, rubbish. The 312T, a car that had once been the racing equivalent of an unstoppable freight train, had aged like milk left out in the Monza sun. The downforce revolution, led by the likes of Lotus, Williams and Brabham, had shown up with skirts, suction and clever aerodynamics. Ferrari, they were behind and needed to do something radical. And so, after finishing a shameful 10th in the 1980s Constructors' Championship with a grand total of 0 wins, even the ever stubborn Enzo Ferrari realized something had to change. And that's where the 126C enters the story. This was the prancing horse's first turbocharged Formula 1 car. Now, let's be clear. The idea of Ferrari going turbo was something akin to Gordon Ramsay deciding to microwave a fillet steak. Enzo famously despised forced induction, calling it unworthy of his precious, naturally aspirated masterpieces. But by 1979, even he saw the writing on the wall. Renault had introduced turbos to Formula 1 back in 77, and by the turn of the decade, they were proving to be explosively fast, with emphasis on explosive. So, Ferrari did what Ferrari does when panicking. They hired someone very clever, Nicola Materazzi, an engineer who had already made his name huffing around the mental Lancia Stratos Group 5 cars. He was brought in to sort out a turbocharged engine, and sort he did. The engine Materazzi built was a 1.5 litre V6 arranged at 120 degrees, essentially 2 turbos joined by a very bad idea. Initially, Ferrari toyed with a pressure wave supercharger. This was a device that sounded like science fiction and worked like witchcraft. It eliminated turbo lag, but came with this slight drawback of being physically enormous and completely incompatible with the aerodynamic packaging of a ground effect car. So the team gave up and fitted twin KKK turbochargers, which at least had the benefit of being something their competitors already used, although the acronym doesn't do much for branding. Anyways, this V6 would go on to be one of the most powerful engines in the early turbo era. In qualifying trim, it made around 600 horsepower, which at the time was more than enough. For race days, it got detuned to a more sensible 550, but even in its detuned state, it was still a weapon in a straight line. The problem was everything else. You see, the first iteration of the car, the 126CK, used a barely altered version of the 312T5's chassis, and that frankly was like fitting a jet engine to a rowing boat. It had no downforce, no mechanical grip, and it cornered with all the grace of a runaway fridge. Gilles Villeneuve, one of the bravest men to ever strap into a racing car, famously described it as a big red Cadillac, which in Ferrari speak is basically an insult on par with being compared to a caravan. Still, in 1981, Villeneuve somehow managed to win Monaco and Spain with it, largely by treating the car with total contempt and ignoring physics entirely. But those moments of magic were rare. Ferrari finished a poor 5th in the constructors' standings and went back to Maranello with their collective tails between their legs. And so, they did what any self-respecting Italian outfit does when faced with defeat. They called the British. Harvey, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this surname, it's on the screen, but Harvey, this surname, the aerodynamicist responsible for several clever solutions over at Wolff and later Fittipaldi, was brought in to sort the mess out. He took one look at the 126CK and probably laughed for a week. It had about a quarter of the downforce of the Williams, he said. A quarter. Harvey's changes were sweeping. The 1982 car, now called the 126C2, featured an all-new chassis made from a carbon fiber and aluminium honeycomb monocoque that alone shaved weight and improved stiffness. But it didn't stop there. The aerodynamics were totally reworked, and Materazzi gave the engine a mild going over to reduce turbo lag. The result was a car that could finally corner without embarrassing itself. And then, as Ferrari looked poised to charge back to the front, tragedy struck. At the Belgian Grand Prix in Zolder, Gilles Villeneuve was killed during a qualifying accident. It was a brutal loss, not just for Ferrari, but for Formula 1 as a whole. Villeneuve had been the one driver who could take a struggling Ferrari and turn it into a race winner. Later that same year, Didier Pironi, his teammate, suffered a career-ending crash in Germany, robbing Ferrari of both of its top drivers in the space of just 3 months. Incredibly, despite all of this, the 126C2 still managed to win the 1982 Constructors' Championship. That's just how good the technical package had become. It couldn't carry a broken team to a driver's title, but it could still humiliate everyone else over a season's worth of points. For 1983, the Turbo Arms race had properly kicked off. Renault, BMW and even Tag Porsche were all throwing more power and pressure into their engines than ever before. So Ferrari responded by cranking up the boost. The 126C2B and later the 126C3 were equipped with upgraded engines, producing around 800 horsepower. Visually, the 126C3 had a more refined body and an oversized rear wing, which probably generated more downforce than the entire 1981 car. On the track, the car was competitive, with 4 wins from Arnoux and Tambay, but inconsistent reliability and a lack of strategic sharpness meant Ferrari once again missed out on the driver's title. Still, the Constructors' Championship came home to Maranello for a second year running, and at this point, Ferrari's turbo program was proving that Enzo had been wrong. Forced induction wasn't a crime, it was the future. But then came 1984 and things got a little silly. You see, the final version of the car, now the 126C4, was making somewhere north of 850 horsepower in qualifying. To put that into context, that's more power than the first 3 generations of the 911 combined. But unfortunately for Ferrari, this was also the year McLaren introduced the MP4/2, a carbon fiber masterpiece driven by Alain Prost and Niki Lauda, which was not only faster but also actually finished races without exploding. The Ferrari was still brutally quick on the straights, but it couldn't keep up through the corners and simply didn't have the race pace to match McLaren's more efficient Tag Porsche engine and chassis. Ferrari only managed 1 win in 1984 and lost the Constructors' title to McLaren by a crushing margin. After that, the 126 series was finally put to pasture. In its place came the 156/85, a car with a different chassis, different aero and even more turbocharger fiddling. But by then, Ferrari had already proven the point. Turbocharging worked. It wasn't the barbaric, throttle-lagging death sentence that Enzo feared. It was the only way to survive in a paddock where everyone else was doing it and winning. So, what is the legacy of the Ferrari 126C? Well, it was never the best car in any single area. The early ones handled like a wheelbarrow on bricks, the later ones exploded on idle, and the entire series across 4 seasons couldn't bring home a single driver's title. But in the great Venn diagram of insanity, power and perseverance, the 126C sits in the center. It brought Ferrari back from the brink, showed that Scuderia could adapt to the modern world, and laid the groundwork for every other turbocharged Ferrari that followed. And it did all that with an engine that sounded like it was trying to kill you. In other words, it was not bad for a car Enzo never wanted in the first place. But yeah, at the end of this video, please let me know what you guys think of this car and its story. If you guys did like this video, you'll most probably enjoy most of my other stuff, so just go through my channel, see if there's someone else I like, or check you guys in the next one. Cheers,